4 American Hellcats and 8 German Panthers. Just 5 of those tanks were dead in the first 5 minutes of battle, and they never saw what killed them through the dense fog of France. This is the Battle of Arracourt, World War II. The Panther was a powerful tank, incredibly accurate 75mm gun, slope frontal armor. It was the engineer's dream. The machines killing them? M18 Hellcats, open-topped tank destroyers with about an inch of armor, thin enough that a single rifleman was a real threat. These were built to hit hard and get out fast if things went wrong. So, Lorraine, France, 19th of September 1944, it's a little before dawn. The fog on the ground is so thick you can't see the far side of the field. Rolling straight into it, engines cold, come 8 brand new Panthers. And a couple hundred yards away, hull down in that same fog, 4 Hellcats are already waiting with their guns up.
Piercing power.
The lead gun fires.
German Panzer IV.
A Panther brews up. Then the next. Minutes later, the best tanks in that field are burning up, and the trade has cost the Americans just 1 Hellcat. Now hold that picture. Because the machine this story is actually about wasn't the one pulling the trigger. Hellcat is not what this video is about. The machine we're interested in was slower, heavier, but tougher, and coming off an assembly line in Detroit by the tens of thousands. The tank America's own crews nicknamed a death trap. But was it really? Because America built 50,000 of this death trap, and yet the best tanks of the war, on paper anyway, lost to it. This video tells the story and explains the why. And who was the man who commanded the American tanks in the other fight at Arracourt that morning? A lieutenant colonel named Creighton Abrams, Patton's favorite and future Army Chief of Staff. The man the famous M1 Abrams tank is named after. His Shermans fought their own battle a mile from the Hellcats and knocked out Panthers of their own. Same fog and same result, just with a different tank. So here's the whole thing in one question. How does the worse machine, the cheap one, the one they laughed at, surround and gut the better one over and over again, and then say sorry not sorry while doing it? The short answer is going to annoy some people. This was never about the tank. Let's get back in that fog. Those Panthers belonged to Panzer Brigades 111 and 113. They were part of a fresh counteroffensive Hitler had personally ordered against Patton's flank. On the spec sheet, terrifying, Panthers, brand new tanks, real good, right? In reality, Green Brigades, thrown together in weeks. For the counteroffensive they'd been handed, they had half the infantry of a real Panzer division, a third of the reconnaissance and barely any artillery. And crews with about 2 weeks of training, some couldn't even read the battle map in their lab. So they did the thing you never do with tanks. They advanced blind, no recon screen out front, straight into the fog, into terrain they'd never scouted, and run by crews who didn't know where they were. And they drove into concealed American tank destroyers and Shermans at point-blank range, close enough that even the weaker American gun in this case didn't need to punch a Panther's thicker frontal armor from a kilometer out. It just put a round straight through the weak side. There was no chance to respond back. It's too late. When the fog cleared at Arracourt, the 2 German tank brigades had been gutted, roughly 2/3 of their armor units gone. And this came at a fraction of the cost to the American side. Not because the Sherman or the Hellcat was better than the Panther, because the Americans brought fog, terrain, trained crews, working radios, and a good working battle plan. And the Germans just brought a better gun. Now, before the comments section says it for me, Arracourt is not proof the Sherman was the better tank. Line 1 Sherman up against 1 Panther in an open field at a kilometer, guns cold, the Panther would win that duel head on. Arracourt is proof of something bigger and less satisfying. You don't fight and win a war as a series of one-on-one duels. You win through strategy, tactics, and the systems standing behind them. The side that brings better trained crews, radios, tank destroyers, and a working plan will beat the side that brings just a better tank, and nothing to support behind it or to replace it. The Panther was designed for long shots across the Russian steppe, not a knife fight in the fog around a French farm town point-blank range. They brought a sniper's rifle to a bar brawl. So, park Arracourt for a minute. If it were a one-off, this would just be a good war story, but this was not a one-off. Wars aren't won by who has the best weapon. They're won by the one who can build enough of it, run hard, replace faster than the enemy can kill. The Sherman was never built to beat a Panther in a duel. It was built to beat Germany overall, by existing in numbers no German factory could ever answer. It's the same lens we put on cheap drones versus million-dollar interceptors in our previous video. Every battle has two prices to pay: what it costs you to fire at the enemy, and what it costs the enemy to deal with it. Win that math consistently, and the single duel outcomes will not matter. A war isn't about having a fair fight. It's math, wearing camouflage. It's cost exchange, economics. Let's give the Wehrmacht its due first. The Panther's long 75mm was one of the best tank guns of the war. It could go through a Sherman's front from more than a kilometer out. The Sherman's standard 75mm was an infantry support gun, great on bunkers, troops, not gonna cut it against the Panther. The answer came late. The 76mm firing tungsten cored rounds. Now that was a tank killer, and the Americans upgunned right away, some of the Shermans with it, because they knew the 75mm just wasn't enough. And the Tiger's 88mm was the stuff of nightmares, killing you long before you were a threat. From behind armor, your rounds skipped right off of. Line them up in an open field and let them trade shots, Germany's tanks would win that exchange. So where does 5 Shermans to kill 1 Tiger come from? Not from the battlefield. No. 5 was the size of a US tank platoon, the smallest unit the army bothered to send. This was never about a kill ratio. The line got welded into pop history by decades of documentary retellings. 5-1 isn't data, it's a platoon roster somebody mistook for a scoreboard. Yeah, we sent 5 to kill 1. Not a fair fight. But it's war. Nothing wrong with it. And that's what I'm trying to say. If you can outbuild them, you'll win them. And the death trap, the Ronson that lights first try, that traces mostly to one memoir, Belton Cooper's Death Traps. But Cooper was a maintenance officer counting repairable wrecks, and historians believe he badly overstates how many Shermans were actually permanently destroyed. The theoretical ability to kill a Sherman was never something Germany lacked, but Germany still lost the war. Now let's get to the real ledger. After the war, the US Army went back through the actual battle records of 2 of its armored divisions, the 3rd and the 4th. In Northwest Europe, fight by fight, across about 30 Sherman versus Panther clashes, the Americans lost about 21 tanks. The Germans lost 72. That is better than 3-1, except it's the other way around. This was in favor of the Sherman. Overall, the study rated the Sherman about 3.6 times as effective as the Panther. But buried in that study was the finding that actually decides tank fights. It was never about the gun, and it was never about the armor. It was who spotted who first. Whoever shot first usually won. And the Americans, with a good radio in every tank, communicating with each other, air cover overhead, control of the skies, and they had better positions, often were shooting first. Hold on to that, because this explains everything that's coming next. But how badly did the Americans outnumber the Germans in these fights. Actually, barely at all, about 1.2 to 1. So this wasn't quantity drowning quality, or that 5-to-1 ratio after all. The myth had the ratio exactly backwards. For every Sherman the Germans knocked out in those clashes, the Americans knocked out 3 Panthers. So the myth had the ratio backwards. For every Sherman the Germans knocked out in those clashes, the Americans knocked out 3 in return. Let's talk about Normandy for a minute. It's a very special case. That 3.6 to 1 Sherman versus Panther ratio, this is post-Normandy data, where American tanks were often dug in and fired first. A lot like the ambush that we opened the video with, the Battle of Arracourt. But back in the hedgerows of Normandy that summer, the Allies bled quite hard. And, by the way, not to the Panthers. Of every tank the British and Canadians lost in Normandy, only about 14.5% were killed by another tank. The big killers were anti-tank guns, towed and self-propelled. Nearly half of all the losses were between them. Then followed mines and Panzerfausts. This was a gun you never spotted until it fired. This was a hedge you couldn't see over. Tigers were a rare sight to see. So the 3.6 to 1 ratio is real, but it's not Normandy. By the way, storming a defended coast was the modern version of storming a castle wall. Military planners have a rule of thumb for cracking a prepared defense like this. You want about 3 attackers for every 1 defender. More if they're dug in, and they were dug in. On D-Day, the Allies put about 156,000 men ashore against roughly 40,000 defenders in the assault zone. They didn't take those beaches with a tidal wave of manpower. They took them with a deception campaign that pinned an entire German army at the wrong beach and this is important, total control of the sky and the sea. We'll come back to that in a bit too. So how does the outgunned tank win more of the fights it's in? 3 reasons, and none of them is armor. 1, which we've established already as critical, it shot first. The Sherman swung its turret all the way around in about 15 seconds. The Panther was closer to 18 because it ran a fuel-saving governor. Those 3 seconds really mattered. Whoever got the gun around first shoots first and usually shoots last. Imagine you're 3 seconds too late to pull your gun in a Wild West draw. If you play World of Tanks or War Thunder, you know the circle of death. That's where you orbit the heavy tank faster than its turret can turn, usually with a faster, smaller tank. Real crews couldn't orbit a Tiger like that, but the principle was real and it was trained doctrine. Refuse the frontal duel. Work around to the side and rear where the armor is thin and the slow turret can't follow. Usually you do this as a team. 1 tank draws the gun while the others flank around. And the Soviets, they took it 1 step further than that. T-34 crews rammed the German tanks, kamikaze style. About 700 times in the war, by the way, and 50 times at Kursk alone. They were even trained for it. But that usually was a last-ditch move by the crew because the gun was dead or it ran out of ammo. This wasn't planned tag team. Number 2, the Sherman could hit on the move. And this is a big deal. For World War II, it had a vertical gun stabilizer. It could roll, aim, and fire. Most crews didn't fully trust it, but the ones who used it got shots off nobody else could. 3, and this is the one the spec sheets bury. It ran well and consistently so. Meanwhile, the German Panthers' final drive, the gears that actually turned the tracks, was underbuilt for a tank that kept gaining weight. Best case, it would last about 1,500 kilometers before it tore itself apart. This is a big reason why this engineer's dream of a tank ultimately wasn't considered the best in the war. It just broke down too much. It was a nightmare. One German commission logged 370 defective final drives in a single stretch. Their own general said keeping these tanks running in any orderly way was simply impossible. So much for German engineering. A medium tank that breaks under normal driving is clearly a failed design, no matter how good the gun looks in the brochure. The Panther was a Ferrari that kept popping a flat tire on the way to the fight. The Sherman was a Toyota that reliably turned over every single time, although I guess we should probably say a Ford. And the Death Trap. I think by now you might agree this nickname probably went to the wrong tank. Early Shermans did brew up, but the crew wasn't dying to the gasoline. It was the ammunition cooking off. The shells were stored up in the hull sides on the shelves that hang over the tracks, right where an incoming round was most likely to land. So the Americans did the thing a production war lets you do. They fixed it, mid-war. Shells went into water-jacketed bins down on the floor. They called it wet stowage. But wait till you hear these numbers. Germany built around 6,000 Panthers and 1,300 heavy Tigers. America built roughly 50,000 of the Shermans, and the Soviets, around the corner, built another 57,000 of the T-34s, and nearly half the price per tank halfway through the war. The statistics are asinine. Look, you can be the best swordsman with the best sword, winning every duel one-on-one. If 100 people rush you with machetes or even their fists, you're gonna die. Back to Kursk, the biggest tank battle in history. The Germans did the thing they were quite good at. Across that whole operation, they knocked out roughly 3 Soviet tanks for every one they lost. But they still lost the battle, and with it the initiative in the Eastern Front for good. Why? Because the Soviets could replace their 6,000 dead tanks, and Germany could not. Winning the exchange isn't winning the war. And the Tiger's price wasn't an accident. It was a philosophy. Germany set out to build the most capable tank imaginable. The thickest armor, the biggest gun, precision machined. Well, here's your bill. One Tiger swallowed about 300,000 man-hours. That could build you 2 Panthers. And by Germany's own accounts, that cost as much as almost 3 Panzer IVs. And skilled labor was exactly the thing Germany was running out of very fast. So the score at the end of that philosophy, 1,300 hand-fitted Tigers, well, when you're up against 100,000 plus of your enemy's tanks, I think we all know how this game ends. But building the tank is only half of it. A Sherman that got hit usually didn't die. A recovery crew dragged it home. A workshop bolted on standardized parts, and it was back hunting again, just in days. Meanwhile, when a Panther broke down, often it just sat there until its own crew set it on fire, had to set it on fire, so that the enemy couldn't get their hands on it. And then they walked away, because Germany couldn't haul it back. Fine, you say. If it's all production, bomb their factories. Well, yeah, of course. The Allies spent years and more than 80,000 aircrew lives trying exactly that. Britain's bomber command alone lost 55,000 men, nearly half of everyone who flew for it. Now here's the fact that trips people up. German tank production didn't collapse under the bombs. It actually peaked under them. An all-time high of 1,854 armored vehicles in December 1944, when the cities all around were burning. What did Germany do? Well, it dispersed the factories, it dug them in, and used forced labor. It kept the lines moving. So was the whole bombing campaign then a waste? No, not even close. It actually had precisely the impact. We're going to get to that in a second, you'll see. First, it forced Germany to fight a second front in its own sky and garrison it. Nearly 11,000 of the famous 88mm guns, the most feared anti-tank gun of the whole war, they stood in flak belts over German cities, pointing up instead of around at the Soviet and American tanks. Around 1 million people had to serve that air defense system. By 1944, add up aircraft and anti-aircraft, and by historian Phillips O'Brien's accounting, half or more of German weapons output was fighting the air war. And this is before a single Allied soldier hit the Normandy beach. Second, the bombers dragged the German Air Force up to defend those factories, and the American escort fighters chewed them up. Germany lost its veteran pilots faster than it could train the replacements. That's why the sky over Normandy on D-Day, remember, belonged to the Allies. The bombing bought the control of the skies that saved so many lives. And now, 2 more hammers land. Fuel hit the synthetic oil plants and output crashes from over 300,000 tons a month to 17,000. That's the aviation gasoline the German Air Force ran on, and it fell 90% in a single summer. Number 2, coal. Hit the railways and canals and the coal stopped moving. German freight collapsed from 900,000 wagons a week toward 200,000. So the tank production peaked, and they kept rolling off the line. But then they just sat there. Why? No fuel, and no one to take them. A factory at full tilt, worthless, because the product couldn't leave the lot. So no, the bombing didn't fail. America's post-war survey gave its verdict in one word. This was decisive. I think you'll agree. But look at what kind of victory this was. The bombing was a production contest of its own. Bombers and fighters the Allies could afford to replace traded against the guns, fuel, and pilots Germany needed everywhere else. Back to cost exchange economics, math. So, even bomb the factories turns back into who can outbuild who. So, who won the war? Careful, this is where the comment section, if I had one, can get testy. Say America won it, and you're ignoring that 8 of every 10 German soldiers who died, they died on the Eastern Front against the vengeful Red Army. Okay, so did the Soviets win? Okay, now you're ignoring that they were driving, eating, and burning American trucks, American food, and American fuel. Willow Run was pushing a 4-engine bomber out the door every hour. Both answers hold true. And of course there were others who contributed greatly as well. This was a world war after all, and called so for a good reason. We have to respect everyone's courage and sacrifice in it. So, Germany wasn't beaten by any one single country. It was beaten by a machine with 2 strong halves, American steel and Soviet blood, and it needed both halves to die the way it did, when it did. I think we can all agree, not quickly enough. So this was never about who had the better gun, the better bomber, the better anything. This was always about industrial throughput. Who could outbuild who? Wars are not duels. Not anymore. They're cost exchange economics. The side that wins the math can afford to lose the duels. Sometimes. And so, it was tank for tank, tit for tat back then. Today the battle ratios have shifted. Cheap drones mass-produced against the ultimate interceptor. The cost ratio, 100 to 1. The math got 100 times more brutal. And this time, it's not obvious whether the bigger factory wins. The question for our century is whether the biggest economy on Earth can still outbuild a threat that costs 100th of the answer. This is War But Why. Thank you for watching. Over and out.